The Blood Angels are one of the 21st founding legions of the Space Marines, and were originally the 9th Legion before the second founding broke the Legiones Astartes up into separate chapters of 1,000 Space Marines each. They are well known across the galaxy for their bloodthirsty nature in battle, and feared for the curse of flawed gene seed they carry. The Blood Angels are amongst the longest living of the Adeptus Astartes, with some of the chapter's Space Marines having served the Emperor of Mankind for over 1,000 standard years. The Blood Angels are the noble descendants of that most angelic of the Primarchs, Sanguinius. They are perhaps one of the most celebrated chapters in the entire Imperium, their countless heroic deeds and victories known to untold billions of the Emperor's subjects across the length and breadth of the galaxy. The beauteous, angelic visages of the chapter's heroes adorn Gothic facades and stained glass windows in 1,000,000 holy basilicas, and their portraits gaze serenely from endless copied and much cherished illuminated tomes. Due to recent events, the Blood Angels' numbers were severely depleted. Under the threat of extinction, and in order to quickly replenish their numbers, the Blood Angels were forced to ask their kindred successor chapters from subsequent Astartes foundings for a tithe of warriors from the related chapters' pools of neophytes, their candidate Space Marines. With these tithes of new recruits, and the recent arrival of the Primarch Space Marines during the Indomitus Crusade, the Blood Angels were able to replenish their losses, though they still face a time of trial like none the chapter has known since the days of the Horus Heresy. Yet, hidden from the multitudes, the Blood Angels harbour a terrible curse. When their beloved Primarch was slain at the hands of the arch-traitor Horus, at the very height of the Horus Heresy, every Blood Angel was doomed to share a portion of the pain inflicted upon his flawless form. From that day forth, every Blood Angel has been tormented by visions of the last moment of Sanguinius. The older the Space Marine gets, the more frequent and debilitating such waking nightmares become. Should he not fall in battle, every Blood Angel will one day become so consumed by these soul-searing visions that he will descend into madness, in which he must witness the death of Sanguinius over and over again. He is stuck there, ever unable to intervene as the War Master enacts his vile treachery in this vision. The very inevitability of their curse ennobles the battle brothers of the Blood Angels, driving them over onwards to a glorious death in the name of the Emperor and their Primarch. Where lesser men might have surrendered to the dark urgings to shed the blood of the enemies of the Emperor, the Blood Angels have remained pure and noble for 10,000 standard years. Despite this, the chapter is dying. For each year, ever more of its brethren succumb to the so-called Red Thirst. This is the desire to rend limb from limb those responsible for the death of Sanguinius, and by extension, every enemy of the Emperor. The death of Sanguinius represents one of the most perfidious and tragic moments of the Horus Heresy, for he died at the hands of his brother Primarch, the arch-traitor Horus. Although some say that the sacrifice weakened the War Master just enough to allow the Emperor to later defeat him at the climax of the Siege of Terra, the death of Sanguinius is mourned to this day, and felt keenly by the Blood Angels, in whose veins his blood still pumps. When war calls and blood is spilled, the Blood Angels are gripped by a fury born of the last moments of their Primarch's life. For some, the thirst is too great, and they are entirely overcome by what is called the Black Rage, cursed to end their days reliving their beloved Primarch's death over and over again. The beatific sons of Sanguinius are known and celebrated across the Imperium, representations of the greatest heroes of the Blood Angels carved in marble, painted in oil, and sewn in tapestries in 1,000,000 cloisters and more. Their angel-winged Primarch is an object of veneration on countless worlds, his perfect visage gazing down on the faithful with a mixture of benevolence and pity. The Blood Angels are the inheritors of Sanguinius, and they bring death from above to the enemies of the Emperor. The chapter seeks the beauty of perfection in all it does, and in one particular field of warfare surpasses all other practitioners. While all chapters of the Adeptus Astartes are masters of the drop pod and Thunderhawk assault, the Blood Angels have become synonymous with the flawless execution of the aerial assault. They deploy an entirely new pattern of vehicle of mysterious origins, the Storm Raven gunship. This vessel appears as a lighter cousin of the Thunderhawk, and while its smaller size means it carries less weaponry and a smaller troop capacity, it greatly makes up for this in speed and maneuverability. While the Adeptus Mechanicus took several standard centuries to examine and debate the use of the standard template construct imprint of the gunship, the Blood Angels saw its worth immediately, and set about introducing it into their armory. Lately, the Chapter's Forge has been able to perfect its fabrication methods to such an extent that the gunship is now being used throughout the entire force. While the gunship is only just beginning to enter service in other Astartes chapters, the Blood Angels are already masters of its use, and they have refined methods of aerial assault others are just beginning to learn. The Blood Angels' doctrine of aerial assault culminates in savage close combat. Whether they are derived into battle by Thunderhawk or Stormraven gunship, or in the troop bay of an armoured transport such as a Rhino, Razorback or Land Raider, the Blood Angels are all but peerless in their mastery of close combat. This is in part because the gene seed of Sanguinius grants his sons an incredibly long lifespan, even for Space Marines, during which endless solar hours of practice and countless battles hone their skills to perfection. Yet, the Blood Angels are not driven towards the fury of close assault by tactical necessity or battlefield doctrine alone. The chapter's reliance on blood and the need to cleanse it to keep the flaw at bay exerts a strange and all but irresistible hold on the Blood Angels. In battle, the Blood Angels are drawn to spill the blood of their foes, and their ordinarily noble countenance can occasionally transform into twisted, rage-fueled masks of savagery. This is referred to as the Red Thirst, and it is something that every Blood Angel experiences. For many, the Red Thirst is a prelude to the ultimate expression of the flaw, the Black Rage, in which the state becomes permanent and all-consuming. The Blood Angels and their successor chapters, known as the Sanguinary Brotherhood, are unique in that their gene seed imposes an unusual and ultimately tragic flaw upon each battle brother. For most chapters, service begins as a neophyte, with the initiate becoming ever more senior the more battles he survives, until the few that remain are granted command of a company. They can then become a specialist such as a chaplain, or even become the master of the chapter itself. The Blood Angels, however, experience an entirely different journey to most Adeptus Astartes, though few outside of their ranks ever learn of it. The Blood Angels possess an almost supernaturally noble, almost saintly countenance, their features handsome and pure. This is all the more amazing because the chapter recruits from the short and stunted men of the tribes of Baal, riddled with stigmata, lesions, and carcinoma caused by radiation poisoning. Their dramatic transformation into the saintly neophytes is only made possible by arcane blood rites. Over a lifespan far longer than the average Astartes, the Blood Angel hones his skills, yet with each battle he experiences something more of the flaw, the urge to spill the hot, steaming blood of his foes grow even stronger. As it does so, the battle brother is driven to spend longer periods of time purging his own bloodstream within the crimson embrace of his transfusion casket. After several standard centuries of service, he must spend long solar hours within it, having every drop of his own blood scrubbed clean. At some point, the Blood Angel is likely to feel the stirrings of something deeper, the rage descending not at the culmination of battle, but before it. These are the first echoes of the Black Rage, and while most Blood Angels fall in combat long before succumbing to it, those who cannot hold it at bay are forced to enter the chapter's infamous Death Company. The tragedy of betrayal. Fate is a cruel master, for no matter how much his prey might twist or turn, no matter what triumphs they might rise to or what trials they overcome, he will still drag them down. The Blood Angels struggled against the fate written into their very genes, defied the role the Emperor chose for them, and dared to believe they could transcend the darkness that followed them. They took the worst of mankind and made of it something bright and true. They rose above what they had once been and stood astride the fledgling Imperium like the guardian angels for which they were named. Yet, nurtured in their successes were the seeds of their fall, in the jealousy of the fallen Warmaster Horus, who saw in them everything he himself had thrown away. The opening stroke of the Horus heresy brought the Blood Angels to their knees, and the tragedies that were to follow would shatter their resolve and leave them broken. Such is the nature of the IXth Legion that they did not surrender to despair, nor surrender to darkness, but rose again and again. What might have Sanguinius and his sons achieved were it not for the dark fate brought upon them by treachery and genetics? What brilliant flower might have bloomed from the carnage and blood of their origins? That unknown future is yet another casualty of Horus's civil war, the Blood Angels left to endure the slow degeneration of their noble line with the stubborn pride that is their hallmark. The dregs of Old Night. There are many noble legends of the Unification Wars, of the battles where the Emperor's newborn Space Marine legions swept aside all who opposed him before them. Among these tales, there are none to be found that mention the IXth Legion, only grim rumours and half-heard whispers. Where the first companies of the Proto-Legions were bloodied in Albia, Indonesia and Frank, alongside the massed ranks of the Thunder Warriors, the IXth Legion was absent, granted a role as vital as it was unsightly. The old IXth Legion served the Emperor as an inferno serves a general upon the battlefield. They did not conquer, but instead ravaged, growing and growing as they went, a weapon that could not be directed or controlled, only endured. Few in number, the early Space Marine legions fought as mere vanguards to larger foes, a sharp dagger alongside the blunt sledgehammer of the armies of Unification. They were the fulcrum upon which the battles turned, the point of control, waging small-scale battles by precision and audacious raids. The IXth Legion was made in a different image. Even in their earliest days, they were amongst the largest of the Proto-Legions, and when they made war, it was like the sudden arrival of a tsunami, sweeping away the opposition in a flurry of brutal assaults. They found themselves deployed to the most dangerous war zones of Terra, to those accursed regions ravaged by the radphages and chem strains of Old Night, places where only the most twisted and debased breeds of mankind still lived. In the wastelands that existed outside of history's spotlight, they held the line, alone and unnoticed while the Emperor drove home his grand conquests. This grim fate was no accident, no arbitrary choice made by a distant general, for each of the legions had been granted genetic tools to fit the roles for them by the Emperor, and the IXth Legion was no exception. Where other legions took only the best recruits, princes and champions among the conquered techno-barbarians nations of Earth and produced but few initiates, the IXth Legion took in the hordes of dispossessed and broken, and made of them an army of angels. Scarred by so many long generations mired in the rad zones and sunken fortresses of Terra's poisoned wilds, these creatures were no longer entirely human, but horribly mutated beasts that the old tyrants of old Earth had driven out and hunted. Yet, from such base materials emerged a breed of Legiones Astartes, uniformly tall and fair, their features sculpted in stern elegance. This unique genetic template of the IXth Legion's as yet unknown sire seemed to favour the twisted and warped, though the pain it inflicted on those inducted into the Legion was more than most could bear. As those weakened by years of exposure to the most horrific rad zones and poisons rarely survived such an ordeal, the number of recruits that endured to become Astartes of the IXth Legion were few. Yet, unlike the other legions, the IXth cast their net wide and claimed entire tribes of wastelanders, prisoners of war, and the long train of hopefuls that always followed in their wake, seeking the miracle of transformation. Omophagea and cannibalism. The bloody-haired apothecaries plied their knives without rest to keep the Legion at fighting strength in even the most hellish war zones, and though the legend of the IXth languished, its ranks did not. Even as their ranks swelled, the dark rumours that followed them grew as well, for the Emperor's legacy had endowed them with other, darker gifts. These gifts were also to grant them a new epithet among the rank and file of the Emperor's mortal enemies, the Eaters of the Dead. For in the wake of each battle, the elegant forms of the 9th Legion haunted the field of battle long after the fighting had ceased, seeking out the finest among the fallen and feasting upon their flesh and blood. Many of the victories fought to bring unification to old Earth were marred by the sight of blood-smeared angels stalking the fallen and wounded champions of the enemy across the field choked with corpses. Though few among their detractors realized the purpose of this grim fixation, for this too was part of the Emperor's grand design. For though the genetic augmentations that had transformed them, the 9th Legion were capable of stealing their enemies' power from them, genetically absorbing their knowledge and skill, and making them their own through the use of their omophagea implants. All that was required was the consumption of the foe's bodily tissues. In the broken places where they fought, alone and far from aid, this trait brought the 9th Legion priceless information and made even the most raw recruits battle-ready. Yet, the macabre reputation they had gained hung about them like a shroud, lessening their achievements. They had been created to fight monsters, alone and in the darkest places, but in doing so, they risked becoming creatures even more foul than those they fought. Revenant Legion. The wars of unification swept out into the Sol system like a storm, unstoppable and wild, and so too went the 9th Legion. Despite being amongst the largest in number of the early legions, its ranks bolstered by widespread recruiting during the War for Old Earth, the 9th found no place in the hosts arrayed to assault the Jovian moons or the resource-rich inner worlds during the early days of the Great Crusade. Instead, its flag was planted among the artificial moons of baleful Neptune, whose labyrinthine tunnels and dark halls were the lair of Xenos raiders and the last genetically debased human colonists of that far-flung outpost. There was little here to be gained but time, precious time, for the Emperor to claim the orbital shipyards of Saturn and the allegiance of Mars, for which he needed the raiders and mutants of the outer worlds held in place. To that end, he sent the 9th Legion forth to die. 12,000 warriors of the 9th Legion, all veterans of the Wars on Terror, disappeared on the moons of Neptune. While the Emperor and his grand armies brought Saturn, Mars, and the inner worlds to heel, no word from the 9th Legion reached them, either of their success or annihilation. By the time these conquests were completed and the Emperor returned to the cold darkness of the outer system, few expected to find anything other than frozen corpses. Yet, when they reached Neptune, it was to find the 9th Legion alive and well. Indeed, despite the loss of many of their original complement, the size of the force was almost the same. Bolstered by recruits taken from among the dregs of Neptune's barely human population. Where others might have floundered and fallen, the 9th Legion had only grown stronger, rising from the ashes of defeat like a bloody phoenix. In those bloody days, the Legion was an ever-changing beast, its ranks largely formed of line infantry, equipped almost exclusively for the brutal madness of close-quarters assault. This was a role at which the 9th Legion excelled, always favouring a sudden and overwhelming charge to a long-drawn-out battle of attrition. They well understood the role of their macabre legend in war, most often choosing to stage their attacks at dusk or dawn, and taking to decorating the storm grey of their early Mark II power armour with a variety of charnel images, and taking to the field unhelmed, that the sight of their angelic visages streaked with blood might unsettle the enemy. Some companies even began to incorporate the secret bloody rituals of the Legion into their doctrines of battle, tearing apart the enemy on the field of battle or indulging in bloody feasts to break their morale and set panic in their ranks. Again and again, the 9th Legion would be cast into the crucible of destruction, only to emerge each time as hale as they had been before. Each time they took from the enemy what was required to fight on, and grasped victory where others had seen only defeat and despair, though it left them changed. On the silent black battlefields of the Kuiper Belt and the endless wastes of rust, the Blood Angels were sent to fight and survive where others could not, to fight the unseen holding actions of the Great Crusade's first faltering steps. Malcador the Sigillite himself was to take note of their exploits and dub them the Revenant Legion, a title that many came to use for the indomitable warriors of the Blood Angels, as much a sign of the superstitious awe in which they were held by many as it was a commendation of their bravery. Indeed, the Sigillite is but one of a number of senior officials within the early Imperium's Divisio Militaris who seemed ill at ease with this incarnation of the Legiones Astartes, lacking as they did the prestige or open popularity of some of their brethren, such as the vaunted 13th Legion or Horus's own 16th Legion. A dangerous and unsightly weapon to be unsheathed only in dire need, and then quickly hidden away again, the Blood Angels found themselves often in the company of those legions less favoured by the bright lords of the newly forged Imperium. With the savage warhounds and not forgotten Blood Angels, in whom Horus had found his own disposable weapons, they found a bitter kinship, though it was rare to see these legions gathered together. Yet it was the work of these ingloriously practical and gore-splattered warriors that set the foundation of the Imperium in place. Though there are scant songs sung in praise of the deeds the Emperor commanded them to perform in the pursuit of the Golden Empire which he sought to build. The Immortal Ninth. Time and time again, the pride of the Blood Angels was to fall on the field of battle. Yet, the records of their valour make common mention of the same handful of warriors and champions. Some remembrances and historians have taken this to indicate a long history of redoubtable heroes, even going so far as to compile these records into a number of epic stanzas, forming the separate entries into a single legend. Yet, the true reason for the longevity of certain names within the order of battle for the Blood Angels is far less heroic. Since its foundation, the Blood Angels had operated in the most extreme battlefield conditions necessity had forced upon them a number of practices that might otherwise be seen as monstrous. One among these, fostered by the nature of their design and the conditions under which they fought, was the consumption of fallen captains by their followers in order to preserve their hard-won skills and experience. As a mark of honour, as well as practicality, it also became accepted that recruits took the names of those whose skills they absorbed, and lieutenants would assume the names of their captains. Such was the resemblance of each member of the Ninth to their flawless brothers, that most outsiders failed to notice this subtle brand of immortality. The most famous example of which being the figure thought to have served as the 9th Legion's first and only master, other than Sanguinius himself. Known to history as Isidore Osoros, this warrior is commonly held to have commanded the Blood Angels from Unity to the discovery of Baal in 843.M30. Yet, a closer examination of the records showed that name died numerous times, only to be replaced by another. Over time and battles past count, this practice became an honoured tradition of the Legion, a visceral ritual that bound the survivors together despite their often disparate origins. Yet as much as it bound those of the 9th Legion to each other, it forced them away from their brethren among the Imperial Army and other legions. In the years before Sanguinius's return, no few of the other Primarchs expressed a distaste with the practices of the Blood Angels, though they could not dispute their success on the battlefield. Such was the legacy of mistrust and barbarism that the Blood Angels carried with them, one pressed upon them by the brutal necessity of their calling. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a like and tell me below what part of Warhammer 40k you want me to cover next. Please subscribe for more Warhammer 40k. My name is George, this is Jam Punch, and I will see you next time.